welcome back. In my last video I showed you my process for taking various images, some from the public domain, some from the likes of Creative Fabrica, photos and others, and I went through a method of quickly converting them from the original image to sketches that could be used for colouring books and printables. That process involved creating a macro to speed up the workflow, and if you haven't watched that video then I'll leave a link below as I recommend you watch that first, otherwise this one won't make much sense. Now I'm going to add to that process by showing you how to use batch jobs to work even faster. Don't forget to like, comment perhaps on something you'd like to see me cover, and subscribe if you find these videos useful. And if you'd like to buy me a coffee to help support this channel, that would be very much appreciated as well. So in this second part of the process, I'm going to cover how to use batch jobs to take the macros we created in the last video and all the images and do the whole job in one process. So in this second part of the process, I'm going to cover how to use the batch jobs to take the macros we created in the last video and a group of images and do the whole job in one process. I have a group of images here in a separate folder which I've already been through and cleaned up from any unwanted parts in the images that I don't need. I have a dozen, but you could have as many images as you wanted, say around 30 or 40, the average number of pages for a colouring book. Some are from the public domain, some are from Raw Pixel, others are ones I picked up in Creative Fabrica. The ones in the public domain mostly have backgrounds, but that doesn't really matter for this process. Now we're going to use the macros previously created from part 1 of this process within this batch job. And we don't even have to open any of these files and set the macro going individually on each picture, because that will all be part of the batch job. However, I would say that if you wanted all these images to be exactly the same size, you would record a macro on the first one, setting up the size you wanted, and I refer you to part 1 of these videos again for the process to set up and record a macro. And then think about your ultimate page size that you want these images to be, and maybe set each of your files to that size to start with. One reason for doing that could be that perhaps you want to add a border around your images using the batch job. If your images were all different sizes, then your crop would not take into account the inner image. So if that's one of the things you'd want to do, say you had 30 images that you want to put into a colouring book and you want them all the same size because you want to set a border around every single page, then you'd need to make sure they were all exactly the same size to start with, because that way you can run the batch job to set the size of the image and then run the next macro within the batch job to perhaps add whatever border you wanted to add. But that is one thing to take into consideration when you're setting up batch jobs, what exactly it is you need the batch to do for you that's going to save you time. Things like the resizing that I already mentioned, adding borders, jobs that are repetitive and use the same action. Then the way to set up a new batch job is to come up here to File and drop down to New Batch Job, and then it's asking for the source of where you've put your files that you want to pull in here. So if you click on Add at the bottom, it will take you to your Explorer. Choose the folder that you want your images from, and I had mine already set up in a folder, and select all the images. Hold down Shift on the first one and then select the last, and we will open all those up. So now they are all added into the list to run your macros on. Then you need to set it to save it into a particular folder, and I'm going to use the same folder that these images came from, so it's already in there, so I will say yes. We will select images there and press select, and now you'll see the path listed there. Your next option is to save the formats that you want your images in, and I always save the original photo image, or save it as a photo image, so that I can go back and merge the layers afterwards, which you wouldn't be able to do if it was just a JPEG or a PNG. I also like to save it as a JPEG and a PNG, and it will do all of that at the same time. You've got 4 other options down here as well. And having said that it's best to resize before you start, you do have the option of changing the sizes here by putting in the width or the height, and you have an option to select to preserve the aspect ratio here, which is automatically ticked. Then we're going to choose the macros that we want to run, and as I have several, I will scroll down through, and I want to create sketches. So I'll choose the one I recorded in the last video, which was black and white sketches. Choose the one you want and then click apply, and it moves it across to the applied macros. And the order that you select them in is the order the macros will run in. So if you wanted to use any of the others, again, you need to think about the process and what you want to achieve and which way round they need to be added. So I just have the one macro applied, and if I click OK, you will see it quickly running down the left hand side until all of the images have gone through. And that's in real time, and it ticks them as it finishes, and that's it, done. So now if I go to my folder, and this is the folder that I chose, you can now see that all the images have been saved as an Affinity Photo file, as a JPEG file, and as a PNG file. Slightly confusing because that one has JPEG in its name, but it is actually a PNG, as you can see here, and the one above is the JPEG, and the one above that is the photo file. So if you had 40 or 50 of those to do, you can see how quick that process becomes with a little bit of organisation beforehand. And they've all come through fairly well. There's very few I'd need to go back and play with in terms of levels for the black or anything else really. And I've just gone through and opened up all of these files, some as PNGs and some as JPEGs, so you can see in better close-up what kind of job it's made of it. And I don't think it's too bad. Some people would say, no, that's no good for a colouring page, but on the other hand, some of them are excellent, and it saves you a great deal of time. You can go back in and clean some of this background out if you don't like it as it's come through there. And this is what I mean about borders, that maybe you'd want to take that border off beforehand so you can add a more decorative border. This salmon image has come through very well as a pencil sketch. And there we go. 12 images run through that process in 2 or 3 minutes. Not perfect. Again, it always depends on the images that you start with. So the more detail and the more darkness in an image, which this one had, results in a somewhat more smudged image. So that's the way you use batch jobs to speed up your processing. And if you have a think about your end project, what you want to achieve, and apply the macros and processes accordingly, I think you'll find this will speed up your workflow enormously. And it's also extremely useful when you're doing post-production work with photography, which of course is partly what these things were developed for. I'm not a professional photographer by any means, but there are certain steps within using images on covers where I want to blur sections out, use a vignette, maybe add a mask in different ways, that I can see the batch job and macros working together extremely well. So if you're a photographer and you want to speed up those kind of processes as well, and you haven't played around with macros, then I really suggest you have a go. The worst that can happen is you've got to do it again. Okay, that's the end of that process. I've been Jane Willingale, and thanks for watching. See you next time.